All right, so you want to dive into this economics thing, huh?
Let's do it.
You sent over this excerpt from Ha-Joon Chang's Economics, the user's guide.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's really got me thinking differently about how economics really works, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
It's not just about numbers and graphs.
It's way more than that.
So let's unpack this a little.
Sounds good.
So Chang starts off by saying that a lot of people think economics is like physics or something.
Right, like there's only one right answer.
Exactly. But Chang pushes back on that, right?
Yeah. He uses this metaphor I love.
Oh, yeah.
He says, economists are obsessed with having a hammer. So every problem starts to look like a nail.
What's that supposed to mean?
It means that if you only have one tool or one way of looking at things, then you're going to miss out on a lot of other possibilities.
Oh, I see. Like you're going to try to pass that one solution onto every problem.
Exactly. And Chang is saying that economics is way too complex for that kind of thinking.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also makes economics seem way less about money and more like, I don't know, sociology or psychology or something.
Exactly. It's about understanding how people make decisions.
Right. Within a system, I guess.
Exactly. Like, think about that book, Freakonomics.
Oh, yeah. By Stephen Levitt, right?
Yeah, he uses economic principles
Mm-hmm.
to analyze things like crime rates and stuff.
Yeah, and why people cheat, I think that was in there.
Exactly. So it's not about spreadsheets and stuff. It's about incentives and how people respond to them.
That's super interesting. So, okay, if economics is more about understanding behavior, does that mean there are different approaches?
Yeah.
Because in this excerpt, Chang mentions 9 different schools of thought or something.
He does. And it's not just like an academic exercise.
Oh.
Like these schools of thought, they've shaped economic policies and actually impacted how we live our lives.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
So it's not just labels in a textbook.
No, not at all. Take the classical school, for example,
Okay.
popularized by Adam Smith, right?
Yeah. Right.
They believe in limited government intervention in the market
Okay.
because they think this invisible hand will just guide everything towards efficiency.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that. But then you have other schools of thought the Keynesians, I think. They argue for more government involvement, especially during those economic downturns.
Exactly. They argue that government spending can really help to stimulate demand and pull an economy out of recession. So you can see how these completely different perspectives lead to very different policy decisions.
It's like looking at the same problem with totally different glasses on or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes me wonder, how do we, as non-economists, even begin to navigate all of these different viewpoints?
Yeah.
Because honestly, it feels kind of overwhelming.
It can be. It can be. But that's why it's so important to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each of these schools of thought.
Okay.
Like, for example, classical economics. It might work well in theory, assuming that everyone is perfectly rational and there are no market failures or anything like that.
Right.
But, the real world is messy.
Definitely not perfect.
So Keynesian economics acknowledges that and provides tools for intervention when things do go wrong.
So it's less about picking the right school and more about having all the different tools or something.
Yeah.
Like if I'm reading an article about government spending, I should think about what would a Keynesian economist say?
Precisely. And this brings us to another really important point that Chang makes,
Okay.
which is that economics is inherently political.
That's really interesting because we're always told that economics is supposed to be neutral, right?
Right.
Like objective, like math almost.
Yeah, exactly. But Chang kind of dismantles that myth.
Okay.
He argues that even something like GDP, which seems like a pretty neutral measure.
Right. GDP, that's what? A country's economic output?
Exactly.
Seems pretty straightforward.
It does. But even that is influenced by values and political goals.
Wait, GDP, how can that be political?
Well, because it focuses mainly on market transactions. So things that are bought and sold.
Right.
But it ignores things like, unpaid household labor, which is often done by women, or even the environmental impact of production.
So it's a very narrow view.
Exactly. So while GDP might tell us how much a country is producing, it doesn't really tell us the full story.
Like who's benefiting and at what cost.
Exactly.
So even the way we define economic progress can have these built-in biases.
Exactly.
Wow.
And those biases often reflect the values of the people or the systems that created them in the first place.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack here.
There's a lot to unpack.
There's a lot to unpack here.
There's a lot to unpack.
It really makes you think about all of those hidden assumptions.
It really does.
Like we're supposed to just take GDP at face value,
Right. It's this completely neutral measure of progress.
Yeah, but it's not that simple.
No, not at all. And Chang gives another example in the book.
Oh, yeah.
It's this idea of Pareto efficiency.
Pareto efficiency. Can you remind me what that is again?
Yeah, so basically it says that a change is only considered good if it makes at least one person better off without making anyone else worse off.
Okay, that makes sense, I guess. Like, on the surface, who
Yeah.
wants to make things worse for someone, right?
Exactly.
But I feel like there's something missing there.
Well, because in the real world, right, most big changes, especially in something as complex as the economy, there are going to be winners and losers.
Right.
And Chang argues that this Pareto standard, it often ends up favoring the status quo
How so?
because it makes it really hard to justify policies that might disadvantage even a small group of people, even if those same policies benefit a much larger population.
Oh, I see. So even if it's like a net positive,
Exactly.
there's still that barrier.
Exactly. And that's what Chang wants us to be aware of, to not just accept these economic ideas as like neutral or inevitable.
It's like the sneaky barrier to change all dressed up in fancy economic jargon. Which brings us back to something we talked about earlier, this whole idea of economic literacy.
Right, because we need to be able to unpack those assumptions.
Right, exactly. And understand, like, are there agendas maybe embedded in these different economic arguments?
Absolutely. It's about empowering ourselves to ask those critical questions, like who benefits from this policy? Or is there another side to this story that's not being told?
And that can feel intimidating, right?
It definitely can.
Because it's like everyone else is fluent in this language that I only vaguely understand.
That's exactly why Chang wrote this book, to give people the tools to engage in these conversations, even if they don't have a PhD in economics.
Okay, so give us the tools. Let's say I'm reading an article about a new trade deal.
Okay, yeah.
How do I even begin to, like, see through the spin?
Well, one of the most important questions to ask is, whose interests are being served by this? Is this policy going to benefit a specific group more than others? Is there someone's perspective that's being left out of the conversation?
It's so easy to get lost in the abstract theories, but bringing it back to actual people, like their lived experiences,
Right.
that's what makes it real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to question the data itself.
Okay.
Look at what's being measured and what's being left out.
Because even statistics can be misleading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can be presented in a way that supports a certain narrative.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine you're looking at some economic data, and it's all about job growth,
Okay.
but it doesn't say anything about wages.
Oh, okay.
You might look at that and think, oh, the economy's doing great. Look at all those new jobs.
Right.
But if wages haven't increased at all, then it's a very different story.
Totally. Yeah, it's like you're only seeing one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And often the missing pieces are the ones that tell us the most about who really benefits from these economic policies.
It's about looking for those unspoken assumptions, you know?
Exactly.
The things that people just take for granted.
Like if someone's arguing for deregulation, are they assuming that businesses are always going to act ethically?
Right. Or in the best interest of the public?
Exactly. History has shown us that that's not always the case.
Definitely not.
Yeah,
So we need to be aware of those blind spots.
absolutely. Because like Chang says, no economic model can perfectly capture like the messiness of human behavior.
Right. And humans make up the economy.
Exactly. And as Chang emphasizes, economics is just as much about power and social norms and political ideologies as it is about like supply and demand curves.
It's all interconnected.
It is all interconnected.
It is all interconnected.
It is all interconnected.
And you know what? It's like once you start seeing all these different angles and these different schools of thought, you can't unsee it.
You can't, it's like, yeah,
It makes following those economic debates way more, I don't know, dynamic.
totally. Yeah. And Chang actually takes it a step further.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about how these different schools of thought have actually influenced like historical trends
So they've had a real world impact, like outside of just the textbook.
big time. Like think about the rise of neoliberalism in the 80s
Okay.
with all that emphasis on free markets and deregulation, globalization.
Right.
That didn't just happen out of nowhere.
Right.
It was the result of certain economic ideas
Mm-hmm.
gaining traction and, influencing those in power.
So like the classical and neoclassical schools we were talking about before.
Exactly.
So it's like those ideas become self-fulfilling prophecies in a way.
In a way, yeah, if everyone believes it, then they're going to make decisions that reflect that belief.
Right. Like if they believe that the market can solve all our problems,
Right.
then that's the policy they're going to pursue.
Exactly. And they might ignore the potential consequences.
Exactly. Which is why I guess understanding the history is so important.
Absolutely. because it helps us, like, see those underlying assumptions, right?
Yeah, yeah, that we might not even be aware of
Exactly. Exactly.
because we just take them for granted.
Like, oh, that's just how the economy works.
Yeah, like it's a force of nature.
Right. But it's not. And Chang reminds us of that.
So if we want to change the system,
Yeah.
we got to understand, like, what built it in the first place?
We have to understand the ideas, the history.
It's like that quote, if you don't learn from history,
Right. You're doomed to repeat
you're
it.
doomed to repeat it. Exactly.
Exactly. And that brings us to, like, the big question here.
A $1,000,000 question, you said.
Yeah, exactly. If these economic theories are like tools, you know,
Okay.
for shaping the world, then who gets to decide which tools we use?
Yeah, because those choices have real impacts on people's lives.
Absolutely. It determines who benefits and who gets left behind.
And all too often, those decisions are made by people in positions of power.
Exactly.
Yep.
Who may not represent the interests of the majority.
Exactly. And that's why all of this is so important.
It is.
This economic literacy stuff.
Right. The more people that understand these things,
Yeah.
the more we can all participate in shaping a better economic future.
Exactly. It shouldn't be this thing that we just, like, leave to the experts.
Exactly. And that's what I love about Chang's book.
Yeah.
It's a call to action
It is.
for everyone, you know.
So what you're saying is, I don't need a PhD to have an opinion on the economy.
You don't need a PhD. You just need to be curious, ask questions.
Question everything.
Question everything.
Ask who benefits.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to be wrong, you know?
Yeah, it's all part of the learning process.
That's how we learn.
Awesome. Well, this has been so insightful.
It has been fun.
I feel like I have a whole new perspective on, like, what economics is and how it shapes our world.
I think that's a good place to leave it.
Yeah, so to everyone listening, don't be intimidated by economics. It's not just numbers and graphs.
It's about people.
Exactly. And it's about power.
And it's about our future.
It's a conversation that we all need to be a part of.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep asking those tough questions.
Keep learning.
And we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.